Welcome to the show today. Today I have Mauricio Campos Suarez on the show, and he's been a digital executive for the past 15 years at Pfizer and then at MSD. And I'm just super excited to dive into your story, dive into a little bit of your experience, specifically in these times of change, depending on when you're going to see this interview or when you're going to see some of these snippets. We may already have passed this corona crisis or whatever it's going to be called in the future. These crazy times. So I'm very excited to talk to you and discuss a little bit about leadership, transformation, talk about deeper stories about the why behind things, and also very much talk about your story. So Mauricio, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the invite.
So tell me a bit more about who you are, and specifically, what is the story that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, so if I go back to where I come from Argentina. That's where I born and raised. After university, was the 2001 crisis, and kind of my whole world shake, in a big time, like similar to the current time, I realized how unstable things are and how, things rapidly can change overnight. And that's, pushed me to really try new things on terms of traveling. I started traveling after that crisis, and first stop was in Canada, and pretty much I discovered more like the broader perspective of different things such as mindfulness and meditation. That's where I found out first. Reality is that with my engineering degrees, I pretty much moved to Europe just to try luck, and that's where I found my first opportunity working for Pfizer back then in Madrid, as an analytics and digital person that was trying to put together the data behind the European data warehousing. And pretty much that opened me the door also to join MSD later, and really start exploring different countries together with my wife, and first to Turkey and now here in Switzerland. And pretty much for me, the most relevant things are really to try to put digital on the service of the companies I work, plus also the people aspect. I'm really passionate about that and culture.
Great. So we're going to have an interesting conversation today. Very good. Now, I want to stay with the story for one more minute. Can you maybe talk about, I think you already talked a little bit about it, but I'm going to go into it again. Can you maybe share a little bit more about what is a defining moment, or what was a defining moment for you that you feel this is really something that shaped me greatly in terms of who I am today?
Yes, I can mention, back in that year, 2001, right? That was a big financial crisis in Argentina, where I personally lost all my basic saving. I was very young at the age, but, and everybody lost their saving mostly. And, it was a big shake for everybody in Argentina back then. And I took the decision just to take a break in Christmas. That was kind of a very family moment, for most of the people in Argentina. But I took a break on my own. I took the decision to go camping to Patagonia on my own solo for 2 weeks, really during the Christmas break. And that was, for me, a moment to self-reflect. It was like a self-retreat without knowing anything about meditation or mindfulness, but kind of find it within myself, those kind of things that, just to be in nature in complete silence, because, Patagonia is one of those places in the world where, silence is immense. Having that time for myself, just to rediscovering what I was going through and where I want to go.
I love that piece, which I guess is has a lot to do with mindfulness and sort of like consciousness and things like that, where you are on that journey today. So I want to talk a little bit about the why behind things, the why behind you. Is there a red thread, sort of like a common thread that you can see throughout your career, throughout your life, where you feel like, okay, that's really the thing that is driving me, the thing that is keeping me engaged, keeping me motivated, the thing that's really getting me up in the morning to do the work I do?
Yeah, for me, that thing is people, right? And really connecting. I'm coming from a technical engineering background. Pretty much nothing about people is being taught in university. But when I start growing as a people manager, but later as a coach, I really find out my passion about being a facilitator and being a coach. That is those things that really trigger me, really make the best out of me, and really, when I had the chance to facilitate large group meetings, or kind of group dynamics, or one-on-one coaching even, I had that deep connection with people that, really matter a lot for me. And how to bring that together with the digital work that I do, for me is vital, because really, if you don't bring people along with you in the journey of digital, pretty much you are talking only about technology. And my experience that pretty much is a failure most of the time. When you bring people on board, and you make them part of the journey, and you really spend enough time to talk about them, not only about technology or processes, that make the big difference.
I love that piece. It's a common thread that I see so often as well. It's like this, we talk a lot about digital transformation. We talk about technology and emerging technology and things like that. And it's an exciting conversation, sure, yeah. But at the end of the day, usually behind pretty much everything are people, and people are the kind of ingredient that make things work or don't on the other side as well. So it's really interesting to hear that from you as well. One thing I want to dive into in terms of your story is lessons learned, basically, because you had a lot of experience over the past 15 years, growing in different companies, growing in different regions of the world. So can you maybe share one or two specific lessons that you have learned along the way, and then some of the context of how these lessons emerged?
Sure. Probably one that comes to my mind now is with the time I moved to Turkey as part of the integration team. There was a big merger and acquisition in my company in MSD back then. And pretty much my job back in Turkey was just to bring those two big companies together on the terms of technology and information and digital. And I traveled from Spain to Turkey, having no experience at all with Turkey culture. Pretty much I was assuming that the motivation factor, overall the way we work is pretty much the same, because actually when you visit Istanbul, it's pretty much a European city, and you might assume that pretty much are the same kind of mindset or the same kind of motivation factor. And that was my assumption back then. I kind of minimized the fact that actually the cultural differences are super important, not to bring people apart, but to bring people together. And that was one of my biggest learning at the time, because actually I went through that role for 2.5 years. And at the end of that journey, I realized so many different things that I could have done if I knew better on the terms of culture. And that for me is now the biggest learning whenever I'm involved in some of global programs where creating this global cultural aspect, just to deep dive a bit more into those aspects, just to learn more about what are the things that I might need to do different. Not to fake on who I am, but really to adapt to the context and to really connect better and engage better with the people in that culture.
So I want to talk a little bit more about that. This is really interesting because you have two cultures and they're pretty different, and most of the time cultures are very different, right? That's where a lot of challenges come from very often, and that's where a lot of leadership and management challenges also come from and emerge. Now, you mentioned looking at the cultural differences not as a way to driving apart, but actually as a way to bringing together. What do you mean by that, and how do you actually practically manage that when you have different cultures, and I would assume as part of that also different value sets basically that makes up these cultures?
Yes, definitely, and that is part of the understanding as well. Pretty much, the way people behave, in 50% of the time is because of the culture they belong to, right? Coming the influence from there. Of course, there's a lot of components that are personal itself and has to do with your own personality. But for me, one of the biggest learning was around motivation, how to bring people to really get engaged, right? For me, for coming from a culture where, full transparency and equality is one of the factors that, make people more excited just to be more engaged, versus other type of cultures where hierarchy is a thing that is respected and is a value, right? And for me, it was one of the biggest learnings, just to respect that need to really have that hierarchy and to really honor that hierarchy in a way that doesn't come across like, you know, a hash or just to be imposed in a hierarchy, but certain cultures, they need that hierarchy to operate, or is something expected. And when you try to remove it, I mean, more like the quality mindset that you have in Europe, you might, you know, people might feel threatened and stabilize the whole motivation that people has to come back to work and to grow in their career, right?
Very interesting. I really appreciate you sharing that, and also in such depth. Is there another lesson that you feel really is worthy sharing here that you want to paint some context around?
Yeah, so probably now thinking about more on digital, that, you know, for me, digital is nothing new, right? I think that having been in the industry for many years is having something going on for many, many, many years. But I had the feeling that finally we are getting some improvement on the way of really making that happen. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is leadership. I think that what I see across is that from the top of the organizations, this message is coming very clear on the need of transform the way we work, and not only the technology aspect, like bringing new fancy technology that can have, you know, the excitement part, but also to transform the way of working, and the way of working in the sense of how do we collaborate internal and external with the ecosystem, something that pharmaceutical industry has been always very insular, in the sense that we have been very isolated from each other and also from other industries. So what I see the phenomenon is that, one, top leadership talking and really meaning about the shift that need to happen, and secondly, opening up the borders of the companies just to collaborate and create an ecosystem that is creating an amazing effect, because reality is that we can really bring on board best practices and experiences from other industry that has been going on this journey for a long time. And that for me is the biggest learning and transformation that we are seeing right now, that this is making things happening much faster than before.
Now I want to stay on that for a second, because that's a really interesting one. The cross-border collaboration, I guess, is the right way of saying it. Learning from best practices from other industries, and maybe even from competitors, from companies in the same industry. And that may sometimes sound very heretical, because, especially in the pharma industry, for example, right? It's like, what do you mean? Like, whoever does the drug first, wins, right? No, at the end of the day, it's just the competition to the top. So talk to me a bit more about what is sort of like, what are the, I don't know if it's the mindset or the habits or the sort of like the characteristics that are required to actually make something like that work, and also to get the buy-in from top management for something like that.
Great point, Daniel. And I think that is one of the more difficult part, just to get that buy-in from the top management, but also across the organization, because it's something completely new. Just to mention one example without going into detail, but pretty much there are some aspects of the business that are pre-competitive. That doesn't have to do with the core business, doesn't make you a big difference when it comes to competition, but pretty much create an enabler for the whole industry to step up into a way that we can operate. One of those examples is blockchain technology, that right now there's a consortium around across pharma that I was part of that initiation in Switzerland, actually, with a group of 20 pharma a company that has been putting together an initiative just to leverage the technology on the way we do business. And the way we do business is pretty much from traceability perspective, for how do we manage the stock, how do we manage the documentation that need to go with those stocks. And pretty much that is a big difference for the whole industry. Doesn't have to do with how you compete versus your competitor, but pretty much together with the technology partners that are helping on that aspect, how we can do things much more efficient, much faster, and better, and where you don't compete between each other, but really bringing the whole industry a step forward.
Now that's a really interesting one, because it's not the soft talk that you just mentioned in terms of, let's all get together and hug each other until we no longer feel like competitors, in a sense, you know what I mean? It's more about, actually saying, okay, guys, it's clear, okay, we are competitors in a sense. Okay, the business nature is competitive, get it. But wouldn't it make more sense basically to grow the pie? Everybody agrees to that, right? Of course it does make a lot of sense. But how do you do that without competing? Or not without competing, but without making competition a problem necessarily. And then suddenly you have interesting new technology like blockchain that you can overlay to a, I guess, problem or an objective that allows you to actually do it without having to sort of like completely change people's thinking or whatever, because it's simply a technology. I mean, simply, not that simply, but it's a technology that overlays that basically and literally manages it basically. It's a little bit like, you know, in technology we have, you know, the APIs. I'm not a tech guy, but from my understanding, right, of it, we have the APIs and they do the brilliant job of basically making sure things work, things don't interfere with each other, things are managed well. And I often feel like blockchain is a little bit like becoming a human API in a sense that allows us to manage stuff that we haven't been able to do, because now there's a lot more involved than just technology and just software talking to software, machines to machines. Now there's human things involved as well. That's really fascinating to me. That's a really interesting example.
And it's a great example of technology that is pushing the way we think and the way we do things. The trust is a big component, right? And blockchain is enabling that trust in business big time. And that for me is the big shift that we are experiencing right now with this type of technology. I
love what you just said in terms of blockchain, because a couple of years ago, I talked to so many people and said, as part of an interview series talking about blockchain, saying, so tell me, what is blockchain? And everybody said something different, right? Because it's really difficult to say, okay, it's that, it's this, you know, it's that, because it does so many, it could be doing so many things. And the way you said it, I think is really beautiful. It's enabling trust, basically, in business and technology relationships. So this is great. Want to talk a little bit more now about transformational leadership. What I mean by that is, transformation is everywhere. I'm not just talking about digital transformation. I talk about change. I talk about things are never constant for more than 37 seconds, you know? And so I want to talk about leadership in times of change, times of massive change, times of change that we have right now, times of business change, times of business transformations. So one of the first things, a relatively generic question, but I still want to ask it, is, when there's a large transformation to be done in a company, for example, like you talked about a big merge between two organizations. To me, that is a transformation because it literally changes a lot for both parties to come to a common ground. When we're tackling a large transformation, how do you basically go about it from moment zero?
It's an interesting point, right? Because I believe that what we are observing, back to your point, is that one transformation is overlaying the other one right now. There's not a moment where now the transformation is going to start. It's always going on. Let me start by answering your question on what I have noticed sometimes that really make transformation not happening in the positive way, and in the contrary, kind of demotivate people. And what I observe is that pretty much you don't share the sense of urgency, right? What really here for me as an individual, because we are all social animals, but also we think also personally, what is my benefit or what is my threat here and now? And transformation normally has been first of all, when the millisecond that the leader step into the audience and say, okay, now we're going to start a transformation journey, everybody think about themselves. Okay, what that going to make me do, right? Or what are the effect or the impact? And normally negative. Most of the time, we tend to gravitate towards the negative part. So I think that the communication, but not the true communication, the communication that is not only putting things on the whiteboard, on a slide, but really communicating things completely transparent, because transparency is the essential part of transformation, in my opinion. And how that's going to impact people, and what are we expecting from people, and what is the role of people in this role, for me, are essential. What I have seen many times, especially on the pharma industry, that transformation, digital transformation, has been translated in reducing on headcount. especially when we talk about field force and people that are visiting doctors. For me, it's all the opposite, because reality is that you are enabling people on the field, people that know the doctor, people that know the connection, they have the network, has the contact, to do things much better and even much faster with much better quality. But most of the time, that message doesn't come through and end up being like translated, okay, technology gonna replace me. They're gonna put a robot just to do the visit to the doctors rather than myself. And that, for me, answering your question in a nutshell, communication is essential. That is the most important part, and the true communication where that communication can be trust.
It's really interesting, and when we talk about communication, because what I just heard is basically what you got reminded is there's two types of communications. There's what we actually communicate with words, like specifically written words, or even beyond that, the communication in terms of what people are going to put into the words as a meaning. And then there's the other type of communication, which is not the active communication, but it's stuff in between the words, right? So there's the words and there's the in between the words. And then what I heard, or what I felt like I heard from you in terms of communication, is about, the question is not like, how are we going to communicate something? But the question is really like, I guess going back to starting with why, but really about, what's the purpose of the communication? Meaning, what do we want to accomplish? What do we want to communicate actually? Because what you said in terms of making things easier, faster, better, more efficient, whatever for everyone, versus you're going to be replaced by a robot. These are two phenomenally different ways of perceiving a communication, right? And I think the difference is really, the difference of how it's perceived starts in the beginning. Because if the focus is how are we going to communicate this transformation, well, there's all kinds of things that can come out. It could be the robot conversation coming out. It could be the good thing coming up, but you don't really know exactly, because you leave it pretty much open for interpretation. But if you focus on, like, why are we communicating this? What's the purpose? What do we want to accomplish with it? I guess really understanding that and then working from that backwards, which is sort of logical, right? That's what you would do anyway. But then at the same time, it's not the most often thing that is done in the business world. So that's really interesting to me, those two comparisons.
Definitely. Definitely. I think that you summarized it, Daniel, very well. And for me, one of the key elements is just to empower people, right? How do you empower them to have a role in the transformation, rather than sit here and being the victim? Most of the time, that is the role that is, we might end up if we are not engaged and we are not empowered to be part and to play a role in that transformation. And it's very counterproductive, because reality is that if you have a large part of that population of people not really buying in, but even sabotaging the transformation because of the lack of communication, the lack of trust, then pretty much you're set for failure, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's an interesting thing that you mentioned in terms of the victim and not engaging, because that is probably where the real impact happens. Because the actual impact of becoming a victim starts here, right? It doesn't start in the actual outer world. It starts in here, because if you perceive yourself being a victim, that's how you act. So if you perceive yourself being a victim, that's the reason why you're not taking action. You're not engaging, right? You're not even thinking about doing anything actively. But if you perceive yourself as something completely different, as the opposite of a victim, right? As a participant or even as a player, basically, then you naturally take action. It's a really interesting thing just to look at it from the inside out, I guess. So now talking a bit more about people in terms of leadership or management, when you have these transformations, right? It could be like a merger that you mentioned before. It could be just a big transformation program in an organization. First of all, the people that are already sort of like on board by design, either if they want to or not, how do you make sure people are actually engaged?
Personally, what I have observed, one of the technique or method that works the best is just to get a core team of ambassadors, you can call it. People that really buy into the change, people that are fully committed, fully understand why we are doing what we are doing. And being equipped to run some kind of session, group coaching sessions where people can, in small groups, not more than 10, 15 people max, being totally open and transparency with these ambassadors that normally are on the field. What I observe this working on multinational, where you have people in the country that are this ambassador role and pretty much running these kind of sessions where people can be themselves. It's closed door, nothing gonna be shared, it's all confidential, but people can ask the tough question and have the dialogue. And normally it's not about the ambassador to give the answer, but the ambassador to hold the space and to allow people to find their own answers as part of what's going on. And for me, that is one of the better experience I had on terms of how to shift that mindset on people, where you might feel that, okay, it's not so important because it's only one person that really go into the country. But reality is that when peers are talking, it's much more impactful than when a leader on top in a multinational in a single location is talking, right? Because you see your peer talking about something that is really meaningful for you, and then that the shift happen, because it's you can relate with that. You can relate with that person. You can see how that's gonna work, because how the other person that is more on board of the change are seeing things that can transform completely the way that you see the transformation itself.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one in terms of how you actually deal with it. From what I heard, it's really about, the key is really to have people feel understood. That actually, okay, there's really somebody there who wants to listen, not who will be listening because they have to, whether they're ordered to, but because they really want to listen. They want to be there for you. They want to care. It's a really interesting one. Understanding, caring, feeling understood versus vision, direction, guidance, strategy.
Definitely.
I guess both have their place, but I guess if you start with caring, understanding, and making people feel understood, then strategy may actually be more effective afterwards. That's really interesting.
And in a way, this person also feedback the leadership, right? There's a closed loop where you get the insight, what's going on, where are the blind spots of your strategy, and you circle back the leadership to say, okay, guys, this is the feedback coming from the field. That's the important part as well, is also telling people, okay, I'm gonna transmit the message, this is gonna be shared as well, where I give empowerment also for the people on the field.
Very powerful. I like that very close loop, because it's neither top down or bottom up. It's just basically people working together across hierarchies and across organizations. So one more thing I want to talk about is, now, okay, there's an organization or something that is changing, and people are also changing, obviously, right? Some people leave, others have to leave, new people are joining, and suddenly there's specifically when it's something that is built maybe for the next couple of years to be built up. Usually there's a strong need to bring people on board, fresh people, maybe people from outside, people from other locations, people from other functions. In terms of a more practical approach, or maybe like a strategy or a structure or method, how do you bring lots of people on board in a relatively short amount of time? I guess my question. Because in the world we live today, people are, top talent in that sense. You can't pick them up on the street. You can't just go outside and wave a flag and say, join me, or do that on a job board, join me, right? It's not working so well. So how do you actually bring people on board in a relatively short amount of time? More than one or two people. How do you deal with things like that?
Yeah, and I think that you have a point there, a very important one, right? Skills. It's the most important topic I believe that we need to discuss in companies across the board, right? A skill set. And that the skill set is connected with the mindset that we were discussing before. And pretty much, I think that this is connected with the discussion we just had about how people are going to buy into things, right? If people are fully on board and they see the need on getting themselves on board into a new topic, a new technology, a new process, and that inner drive really to make things happen. That is essential. That for me is number one, where you need to make that happen. Otherwise, most probably people are going to pretend that they get on board, or they get through a training, through a transformation, whatever, but they don't really buy into that. And it's a waste of time for the people, because it's motivating and time consuming, and a waste of time. And for the organization, because at the end of the day, those people are only pretending that they really get it. So that for me is number one, getting that mindset right. Number two is just to really get in the personalization of the onboarding. For me, it's essential. Normally, most of the time, we either have face-to-face or we have online, most of the time in company, right? And we don't have the choice, the personalized choice. What we see outside is that pretty much we all use technology completely different, right? We all have, Facebook, whatever platform you use, but you use it for different meanings, and you use it differently. You might like more to listen for audiobooks, or you might want to watch videos, you might want to read through that. And that's the thing that how you can personalize. Of course, you cannot do a huge amount of different content for every onboarding or every kind of training, but you need to find that flexibility in a way that you use the tools that for the personality of that person, for the preferences of that person, gonna fit the best. And for me then, it's about getting that applied, because many times in corporation, I have seen that whatever you teach or whatever on board is being left on the shelf and pretty much never used again. And for me, how to bring that to practice is essential, because for me, it's the only way that you're really gonna embody that learning, embody those new skills. And to make it without thinking, because reality is that is the end goal. Where you get to that embodiment, you really get to really suck that knowledge so deep that end up being part of you.
I love that. I love the structure behind it as well, and the focus on actually really onboarding people and customizing it. Because, think about it today. Customizing the kinds of content that is created, it's not that hard, of course I'm oversimplifying, but making audio from a video, come on.
Exactly.
And transcribing thing, come on. It's exactly. Not, there's more complicated things companies are doing right now than that, right? Of course, the question is always ROI. That's clear, right? So what's the actual ROI on doing something like that and putting in the effort? Of course. But it's not that complicated. It's not that difficult. Now, the last question I have to you is a bit more fast forward. So fast forward many years into the future, you're 80 years old and you're looking back at your life, you're sitting in your rocking chair and looking at the journey that you had and the journey the world has gone through basically over the past many years. At that moment, what is a change that you would really want to see, either in the business world, in the world itself? What is something that is really important to you?
What is really important for me is kind of seeing a world when in 40 years from now, where reality is that connection, not only the technological connection, but really the deep connection between people that might be enabled by technology is much deeper. And that for me is an essential point, because that connection, we are living that right now as part of the coronavirus kind of crisis, where we are at home, but we are fully connected. We have huge amount of resources and ways to connect with people, where I do see that this is only the start. Hopefully in the next 40, 50 years, that's going to be exponential, where we are really feeling citizens, global citizens, and connected with people everywhere across the globe. I was born in a world without internet, right? When I was born, there was no way really to make a phone call to the other side of the world. It was super expensive, and you can do it, once every time. But now reality is that communication and connection is for free, it's everywhere, and that can deeply transform the way we see things, the way we think, the way we operate. And that is for me the biggest trust, how that connection with everybody across the world can really shift the consciousness of the way we do things.
I love that. I love the specific aspect of the depth of connection, because connection today is easy in terms of actually, the technical connection, that's easy, right? The second piece, or I think the more important piece, is the emotional connection. How deep, because if you're texting with somebody on WhatsApp, okay, you're connected, but how deep are you connected? Like, you're probably not feeling like you're sitting next to them and talking to them right now. So how do we bridge that? How do we manage that in a future where we may be physically more remote than ever before? So how do we bridge that? I love that. Very cool. Thank you so much for being on the
Thank
show.
you, Daniel.
We're going to link below this video to the sources like your LinkedIn profile so people can connect actually. So thank you so much for being on the show. Really, really appreciate you having here and just sharing your story. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the invite, Daniel. Talk to you later.